Hey, welcome to the Daylight Savings Time edition of the Golden Bough podcast. I should say more generally, this is the temporal podcast. That was the broad theme. I said something dealing with time, but today is daylight savings. And ironically, I don't know how the time change works in India, but we've all dressed up as if we have not properly anticipated the time change, and Ostic isn't here yet. So I imagine he'll probably be joining us in about 45 minutes. So that's his costume, emptiness. But I from given the back channels, I think he's going to be some sort of time traveler. So I'm Dr. Luke. This is Rascal, my childhood teddy bear, and the lovely producer Jordan. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 37, Oriental Religions in the West, and this is going to lead into conversations about a multitude of different subjects. When we talk about Oriental religions of the West, I think what Frazer primarily has in mind is Mithraism and Mithras. And so we're going to be looking at the ways that that has potentially tapped into the JFK presidency. So up here in the top left-hand corner, just to get things started, I've been reading this book lately that I got at the local thrift store. It is called The Torch Is Passed, which is like a retrospective, very in-depth cataloging of the Kennedy the day leading up to the assassination and the aftermath. It's like one of the most beautiful or the most in-depth texts I've read so far. It's like a magazine, but it's got so many different details. And the first one we'll look at in the next slide. But it's this gigantic book that I really love. But it's a reference to this torch imagery that was in JFK's inaugural speech. And with that in mind, it got me thinking about all the different ways that fire is connected to both Mithraism and to JFK. So we're going to look a little bit at that, um, and also how that spills into or perhaps harmonizes with the Arthurian legend information that we have with Kennedy. Specifically, here we have the sword in the stone, which may be a reference to the petrogenesis of Mithras. We'll look at that. Of course, Cybele and Addis are in the background. Specifically, I want to keep them in mind when we start to think about the calendar, but also how Catcher in the Rye is connected to the Kennedy presidency and what the outfit of young Holden Caulfield may have in common with Addis. Speaking of Catcher in the Rye, is based off of the poem Catcher Through the Rye by Robert Burns. And we're going to look at a bunch of other ways that Robert Burns is woven into the Kennedy narrative and what that potentially means. Also, we're going to look at a critical theorist named Mikhail Bakhtin. I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And we're going to lift his idea of chronotopes to perhaps explain the calendrical synchronicities that we've talked about. And I want to examine some connections to Joyce. We've looked at Joyce previously, specifically through Marilyn Monroe, but some connections that Joyce may have to JFK and how some events that happen in Ulysses parallel that day in November in Dallas, and what exactly the fountain of theory Joyce was drinking from. We're going to look at this figure named Giambattista Vico, and his thunderclap idea of history as it is in the New Science. There's much more to cover here, but those are some of the subjects. And I guess last but not least, I'm fond of including synchronicity in the show from my personal life. We were watching The Gilmore Girls the other day, and wouldn't you know, Jack's son runs for selectman, and they channel a bunch of JFK imagery. Here you see Suki dresses up as Jackie O, and this kind of taps into some of the subjects we talked about earlier with the son of Jack idea that is sort of out there, and how like Jackie O produced or edited Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, and we see that showing up in the show here with Jack's son, the son of Jack, running for selectman. So I just thought that was interesting. And in the subsequent episode, it starts off with him getting hit by a tomato, clearly paralleling the the Kennedy assassination. So it's a weird world. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And Jordan's going to be doing a lot of reading today. Hopefully, this new format will help to contextualize a lot of the big ideas that we talk about here.
Well, that's a great intro, Luke. You ready to keep going?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is such a fun collage, and it'll be fun to spiral around all of these different topics
yeah.
today.
So yeah, so this was the first one. I mentioned that I was reading this big The Torches Past book from Time Life, and one of the on the very first page, I was like, "Holy crap!" Like, no, I wouldn't. There's no way I would find this out just by looking. I'm like so blind trying to understand all these different things. Um, Jordan, I don't know if you can do anything about that. Oh, okay, it was just on my screen, but on slide 781 here, uh, something that I found out while reading The Torches Past is that the man that drove Oswald to work that day, and he's kind of a controversial figure because he has claimed in some of the interviews that I've seen that he did not see Oswald carry a gun into the book depository. Um, his name, the man that drove him to work that day, was Buell Wesley Frazer. Okay, this whole like study of ours is motivated by people noticing the synchronicities between James George Frazer's The Golden Bough and the Kennedy assassination. And you know, last week we talked about a really intriguing detail that I sort of backed into, that the Macmillan publishers were operating out of the book depository, and the cover for the 1963 edition that came out on January 1 in many ways looks like Dealey Plaza. And so here we have another example of Fraser, or a Fraser, being woven into the JFK narrative. And as our good friend Anna Nicole Wordsmith has put me onto this years ago, that frequently cars are relevant in doing this sort of like esoteric decode, right? They like she always talks about them in terms of karma. So this involves us engaging, and I don't think we've ever really defined it, but we do it every once in a while, a practice known as onomancy, the study of the occult or prophetic power within a name. And one of the mantras that goes along with this is nomen est omen. And you can think that this is like kind of a silly thing that has popped into the conspiratorial zeitgeist over the past like 25 years. No, this has been going on for thousands of years. And this is not like necessarily an occult thing. Like you can go back to the Bible and see that words and names are incredibly important. You go and look at all the patriarchs and whatever that are in the Bible, they all sort of contain their destiny. And the Bible doesn't really occult this fact. It says, you know, this is one of the great mysteries of it. And I think this is perfectly encaptured by the by this passage from John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You know, words are these containers that God discloses himself through. And the way that I'm sort of understanding this whole reality is I'm calling it a type of sacramental panentheism. I have a bunch of different names that we're going to go through, but when we look at when we look at Fraser's name, even his own destiny in writing the Golden Bough seems to be present. James means supplanter, George means earthworker, and Fraser means forest strawberry. And you could read this a couple different ways. I mean, obviously, the Golden Bough is about a supplanter displacing the king of Nemai, the king of the forest. That's what Fraser is, forest of the forest, right? That's what the whole book is motivated by. Not to mention, if we look at it the other way, as strawberry, strawberry is one of these first fruits, one of these delicate heart-shaped fruits that are offered up, and that too is relevant when we talk about like the Adonis ritual. So how strange is it that we have the man that drives the car, a 1954 Bel Air, okay, to take Oswald to work? His name Buell Wesley Fraser, and his name means bull, western meadow, and forest. And we've looked at how the bull plays into both the Attis worship, and today we're going to look at it with Mithraism in the Troctony, right? That a man associated with a bull would be driving Oswald to work and a Bel Air, not to mention the Bel Air. Bel is a name of one of these ancient deities. He's he's connected to Marduk, the Beltane festival, or we could say the Lord of the Sun's chariot was the ritual vessel carrying the mock king through the beautiful air to the sacrificial meadow. Now, how much of this is poetic license? We're going to talk about how to grade this type of evidence. I find this to be incredibly intriguing. And then you could, you know, I think really when I do this book, you're just going to have to break down everybody's name. I mean, even with Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald, meadow clearing, battle worthy iron, divine power ruler. I mean, in his name is something about battling and ruling. and I guess ultimately being victorious and supplanting, or with JFK, John, God is gracious, son of the spear ruler, wounded head, ugly head. We've talked about this, how Kennedy means ugly head, but being the son of the spear ruler implies something like a weapon that he was pierced with, right? And so, something that is engaged with in battle. So there are all these little winks and nods. And I do not think that this evidence in and of itself is like, okay, a slam dunk convincing, but I do think it is kind of a starting point. And I think it's important when we grade the evidence moving forward. So I'll pause there and let Jordan comment for a little bit.
Something that came to mind for me, I think this has largely been solved, but most LLMs couldn't count the number of R's in strawberry
Yeah,
correctly.
that is interesting. Yeah, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so I don't know. It feels it's funny. It's a little Easter egg, but it feels like a little wink about how it can or cannot make sense of some of these really deep, more divine topics.
Yeah, we were having a conversation last night, and I've been thinking about how I primarily use the LLMs to it's like what counts as writing, like, and we had this long conversation about what counts as like song composition in the era of digital music making and whatnot, when you're having these things move text around and rewriting it to your prerogative. But I don't think it could really come up with any of this on its own. You have to be very on the ball to direct it the way you want to do it. So it got me thinking a little bit about like meta writing and what it means to write with LLMs, because there's so much concern that it's like degrading our minds in the process. And maybe somebody who's watching this thinks that that's been achieved here. But let's go to the next slide if we can, Jordan. And I'm going to have her. Last week, and really throughout the seminar, we've been dancing around like what this view is, and something that I've articulated in many different episodes, that if you can get past the conspiratorial level of all of this, I think I think in fact the conspiracy stuff is acting as a break on a deeper revelation about the nature of God. And I've made this point over and over again, but now I think we have some fancy terminology to apply to it. So Jordan, if you could read the definition on the left side of this slide.
Theophonic structuralism is a framework for interpreting history as a self organizing extension of a single transpersonal consciousness, often identified as divine artificer or the objective psyche. Unlike conspiracy theories, which mistakenly attribute historical patterns to the clandestine agency of human, quote, cabals, this view posits that reality is an autonomous symbolic process. In this panentheistic model, what appears to be global plots are actually the quote fingerprints of a divine intelligence manifesting through archetypal cycles and synchronicities. By recognizing that all actors, including perceived enemies, are instruments of a collective dream, the observer transcends paranoia and enters a state of symbolic realism, viewing history as an ongoing, purposeful revelation of the divine nature rather than a series of human manipulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this, I think, really fleshes out the idea that I've been developing all along. That's not to say that I don't think there's like conspiratorial elements that are involved in our world. I think you have to be completely naive to not think that that's there. But I'm uninterested in it because ultimately it's not sovereign, and it's just another disclosure mechanism of the divine that interpenetrates every aspect of the reality. And some of the fundamental assumptions of this idea, I've got them outlined here on the right side of the slide: ontological primacy, non-anthropomorphic agency, synchronistic evidence, symbolic identity, and metanoic transcendence. Um, if I mean, we can go through all the different ones here. We've got a lot of material to go. I find this to be incredibly fascinating. I think when I talk about like whatever conspiratorial elements there may be, um, ultimately that connects to the second principle here: non-anthropomorphic agency, archetypal possession. Humans are vessels for forces. What appears as playing conspiracy is actually an autonomous complex seizing a group. Um, the there I think rather than go into all the different things here, which I think are subsumed underneath the definition that Jordan's talked about here, keeping an eye on the clock, um, is that the universe is not just arranged physically. The universe is not just like, okay, cause and effect. We have laws of how like all the physics and things like that work. The evidence that we're dredging up here, like with the names, the topography, the all of it, the recurrence of myth, whatever, is that the universe is actually fine-tuned and built for meaning everywhere. Is it, and I think this would fall under this the synchronistic evidence corollary here. That it's not just physically structured. It is structured. The structuralistic aspect of it is that it is so perfectly arranged for meaning. And I feel like that's a new insight in some way. But I don't want to belabor the point. I know we don't have a ton of time today. We've got 18 slides, so we can go to the next one unless Jordan has something else to offer.
No, I love this because it's putting some very official sounding terms around some topics and concepts that, you know, I resonate deeply with and have for a long time, but really lacked the language.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's been helpful about using these LLMs is that it can
Yeah.
take my raw ideas and schematize it pretty easily. I'm not going to hide from the fact that I'm using it here. I mean, there's a lot of material to cover, and I'm going to take an agent to help me out with it where I can. So something else that I developed with the AI, and look, what I do is I go back and forth with it. It's a negotiation. I'm like, I don't like this. I do like this. This is mirroring what I'm thinking. Um, One of the subjects that came up last time here in this slide that we're looking at is that Osik is very concerned about convincing other people, and I suppose he's right to do that if we're going to try to make this a scholarly enterprise. But I guess for a long time I realized that when you get to certain subjects that people only really listen if it comes from respected authoritative sources, and then consensus can be built around that. And I'm nobody, so nobody's going to listen to me about anything, even things that are as plain as you know observations about the sun and the moon. Okay, no one's going to listen to that unless it was in a textbook that they got uh, when they were 8 years old. So I guess I've kind of written that off. But if we wanted to, and I think it's going to be effective when I think about the composition of this book, that there is a matrix of evaluation that things could possibly be put through. And earlier, I started this podcast off by looking at the onomancy. And this I think we would call incidental or tier one type of evidence. And I'm kind of ranking it here as giving it like a 1 to a 3. Okay. It's kind of like when we looked at the Frazer parallel, the guy driving the car, sort of carrying the mythical script with him and bestowing it upon Oswald. I would say that is kind of a very interesting starting point. And as we do all these different entries, I think you can run through the matrix and get some sort of evaluation. Now, is this going to be objective and true, or is just going to make things a little bit more probabilistic and persuasive to individuals who are like, you're reaching. This is schizo. Now, if we wanted to go to the second tier, we're going to be talking about like life scripts as so much as an individual is embodying an archetype that they seem to be manifesting. And there could be some sort of unconscious or conscious choice in all of this. Like when I was a boy, I found out that Luke was the patron saint of doctors. How much did that how much did that like seep into my mind that um, I needed to go and get a PhD to fulfill the destiny of my name?
Ah, but what you just said is assuming that it works by consciously imprinting on your thinking brain. And
Right,
that's how it manifests. It
right.
could manifest through an entirely different mechanism.
Totally. I'm just, that's why I have it slightly lower, right? It's like it's like above the names, the dates, the puns, the addresses, and things like that. But it's not probably the highest evidence. Like maybe, like for instance with JFK, we've looked at him being a Christ figure, and a Ulyssean figure, a Attis figure, an Adonis figure. Being a highly educated man himself, he probably was deeply familiar with all these different figures, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna mold myself after that, or I'm gonna mold myself after King Arthur. I really liked Camelot." Um, the things that and you could say maybe there is some individual shaping there. I think when we start to get into the schizoid realm is when we start talking about tier 3, the structural aspect of this, the cross domain density. This is like last week we looked at like we've looked at so many different versions of this, right? Like things that can't be arranged through human hands with intentionality. Like we talked about the significance of the Trinity River at Dealey Plaza, and you'd be like, "Are we supposed to posh?" And what that potentially means, it being at the base of Commerce Street, and then it forks and it looks like a tree. Like, are we supposed to actually believe that um, when Cortez or whoever named the Trinity River in 1690, he had some sort of idea that a man named Kennedy, whose name was Uglyhead or whatever, would serve as some sort of sacrificial offering that day in Dallas? No, he didn't. Like this is this is beyond the physical, and I think when we start getting into that realm of thinking, or like you know something like we've looked at like Marilyn Monroe working at the drone factory and having how that's like kind of a symbol of bees and bees being associated with mother goddess figures. Like, do you think she had any idea that that was going on? This is something that's descends upon an individual, or they enter into it unknowingly. And I think that's where we start to see the hand of God, or the hand or something beyond the natural guiding things. And then of course there's like the synchronistic rupture, which I think is like the cherry on top. When you start, this gets into a deeper thing that we need to talk about. It's like when you start seeing the reality in yourself interacting with one another. But I think most of what we're looking at here is not going to pass tier 3, but that's tentatively the tiers of evidence I have established here, and ultimately it's going to be subjective to a certain degree. And I'm not sure I love all of these. These all of this is a work in progress, but I think it's a start.
Yeah, you're just playing with different frameworks that I think makes this conversation more accessible. And I think a valid critique of some of how I've communicated this in the past is very airy fairy and could mean different things to different people. So I like that there's some formalization to play with, even if our own experience is maybe messy and spans these tiers. When I think of a lot of new age systems, they do typically hit a few of these, human design being one, astrology being one. It's kind
Uh,
of this interesting merging, but a lot of them do contain this life scripts concept, which is my critique of a lot of them because I feel like it locks people in to a specific narrative instead of even asking, is this narrative I'm supposed to be or like wants to be playing out? But anywho, I think this is super fun and interesting.
Good, good. All right, I think it's time to get into the substance of the Fraser reading for the week. Okay, do I have you reading a little caption here? I got to check my notes.
Yes, you
Tell you
do.
what, yeah, why don't you get us going?
The cults of Cybele and Attis spread widely throughout the Roman Empire and persisted into late antiquity with dramatic public rituals, while Greeks generally rejected its violent ecstasies in favor of gentler rites like those of Adonis, and Romans and Western provincials were more receptive to its blood rites and promises of rebirth and forgiveness. Interpreted through allegory and philosophy, these practices helped shift religious emphasis away from civic duty and toward the salvation of the individual soul, encouraging personal initiation, inward transformation, and hope of eternal life rather than sacrifice for the state. In this changing religious landscape, the Persian god of Mithra emerged as a powerful rival to Christianity, offering disciplined ritual and immortality, and the church appears to have responded strategically by adopting December 25th, long celebrated as the nativity of the sun in solar cults, including Mithraism, as the date of Christ's birth, replacing earlier traditions such as January 6th in the East.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I thought this was a really insightful analysis that Fraser offered. I think we should probably pause for a moment and think about what it means for our current scenario. But Jordan effectively read the substance of everything that was going on there. But we've seen with the gardens of Adonis and those rituals, whatever. We some plants are planted. So there's some ritual washing, but it's pretty tame. But we get to like the cruder, more air quotes, more savage, objectively more savage rites of Addis, where there's castration and filleting on trees and things like this. This must have been complete insanity to a lot of the Romans at the time, especially when they're just like, "Hey, we're just trying to preserve the state, and you guys are doing things that look pretty psychotic," right? But then within those rituals, obviously, we're getting the notion of bloody baptism with the slaughtering of the bull and the priest bathing in the blood and the remittance of sins. And you can't help but think that although I think Fraser might be speaking out of both sides of his mouth, that really what a lot of the motivation for this was for 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 personal salvation, rather than just purely imitative magic. I guess that was a doctrine that came after the fact, so maybe he can be justified in saying that. But then we also see the a competing religious faction with Mithraism, which was much more diffuse in terms of I had not really known this, but Mithraism gets picked up by the primarily by men in the military forces that were within Rome, and it was spread throughout the Roman Empire, even though it came from Persia. It was part of an earlier version of Zoroastrianism, right? And it gets because it's there's an emphasis on masculinity and secret initiations and caves and things like that. I believe it spread all the way up to Hadrian's Wall in England. Whereas the Phrygian rites of Attis were more concentrated in some of the cities. I'm not some expert in it, but that's my general understanding of it all. But again, there's this idea within Mithraism of immortality and initiation, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to think about how that starts to pull a polis apart. How it how it starts to, if you have too many individuals with heaven on their mind, right, or at the afterlife or whatever, like how do you effectively govern? It does raise very interesting questions. And when I think about the modern Americans experience, like the new Rome, right? And you have so much of what America and Europe are. At least at one time, they had their Christian base, especially in Europe, but it's still pretty pronounced here in America. How you have a loyalty to the state and a loyalty to the afterlife happening concurrently, and at least especially since he draws the comparison there that Christianity by many people has been accused of cribbing and borrowing the religious holidays of Mithraism, because there's so many similarities there, moving the birth of Christ from January 6th to December 25th. uh, what it means, how we're actually able to have a stable society when people have heaven on their minds. It's kind of it's a fascinating question. And in fact, at least you see in Europe with the disintegration of Christianity, they have a more chaotic society, not a less chaotic society. And it seems to be trending that way in America as well. So it's does that undercut what Fraser is saying about the pulls the pulling apart of Rome by Mithraism? Or would something like Christianity and Mithraism actually sustain it in some way that I haven't quite considered?
Yeah, there's a lot here. It's hard for me to believe that this tradition is completely gone. We've merged them all in our culture. And I love your points about the problem you may say that governments have when their population is too religious. You see a common trait in communism is the extinguishment of Christianity, including all sorts of religions.
Well, at least superficially, it goes underground. And
Of
that's
course, of course.
yeah, at least superficial. I mean, communism went away and what's Russia like now? It's very orthodox. So, it's but
Right.
I'm not some expert on it, but
I'm more talking and commenting on what the nation state, the government itself tolerates in an outward expression.
yeah.
Often you see that an attempt to squash either any type of spiritual whatever that deviates from the one kind of philosophy the government wants all the people to
Yeah.
buy into.
Yeah. Well, I think we should keep this all in mind because I think there's reason to believe that Mithraism didn't go away. Okay. And
I
that's
would
going to be kind
agree.
of in the background here. So let's go to the next slide if we can.
I would agree, and it's messy because a lot of the same images are used, I would say, for a lot of these different traditions, but they're tweaked
Yeah,
and twisted in different ways that to the uninitiated, it's all the same thing. But I think you can start to notice once you're symbolically literate how things are used in different ways.
for sure. Okay. So, um, that was the challenge that I put to myself. I was like, well, how is, you know, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, like, okay, everybody's linking the golden bough to JFK. And I'm like, okay, I see the Christ stuff, I see the Addis stuff, I see the Adonis stuff, and I was like racking my brain. Well, where's Mithras fit in here? And and then I was like, oh, and then I was looking at images of Mithras. I was like, what's in his hands? And it's it's a it's a torch. Okay, it's a torch, and he has like a spade or something like that in his other hand, um, or a weapon, a dagger. Let's say, yeah, it's a dagger. Let's say that. Um, I was like, torch. Oh, the inaugural speech. The torch is passed, and and more obviously, the eternal flame. That's what's associated with JFK. And then I was looking at images of the eternal flame site. Oh, it's coming out of a rock. We had looked at previously the provisional eternal flame. They just piped it in and had all these evergreen wreaths around it, and that was very similar to some of the symbols that we associate with Addis, like evergreen trees. Um, but it's coming out of a rock, and I was like, that is just like the petrogenesis of Mithras, who comes out of the mother rock, right, on December 25th, and he emerges to bring order to the cosmos. So I'm not saying this is intentional. I'm saying this is an archetypal eruption, going with my general theory about some sort of sacramental pantheism or theophonic structuralism. Um, Not only that, December 25th is very important in the Kennedy legacy, not so much while he was alive, but after he died on December 25th, or the Christmas Eve. But there was a Christmas trip around the moon. The first really successful Apollo mission was Apollo 8. And on Christmas Eve, 1968, they read the opening chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, which was about the creation of the earth, which is from Genesis. And Mithras is born out of a rock. It's a petrogenesis, right? So all of this is sort of syncing up to say there's something about Mithraism that's going on here once JFK is dead and buried, and the Apollo program, not to mention that Apollo is connected to the sun, and which is going to get us into the cult of the Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. So we could go further with it. The guys that went to the moon, these are all military guys, right? I said earlier, Mithraism is a militaristic cult. It's primarily appealing to men, right? And it's practiced in dark caves. Well, there's no darker cave than outer space, or your little capsule floating in outer space, right? That you come out of. Like, so there's like a parallelism of initiation that's going on here in my mind. Now, do I think some like CIA scriptwriters somewhere like, okay, we need to make sure the events of our reality incorporate elements of Mithras worship? They may do that, but I don't really think that's what's happening here. Again, I think this is just another archetypal eruption that is circulating this figure that paraded onto this collective dream world stage. So I
Well
that's
put.
that is where I started to see, not to mention the dagger or the knife that he has. This was used for the sacrifice of the bull, right? And you could look at this maybe in different ways. You could say, JFK himself was the bull. Maybe I see it kind of like more like the rocket, the Saturn rocket itself or something like this. And in many cultures, the bull was associated with the heavens, the bull of heaven, and so maybe the sky itself was ripped open and sacrificed, and that might be more of the elaborate tauroctony that we're talking about here.
Yeah. You know, to play with this fractal a little bit more, what came to mind for me upon seeing this image today is the iconic imagery of Christ and the tomb and the huge circular boulder that's always depicted.
Yes, that doesn't that look like what's at the base there of the eternal flame, the circular boulder? That's good. That's good. It does look like
Yeah.
that. The stone that was
Yeah.
rolled away. Mm. Yeah, think about how we've looked at the violets in between the bricks, but I didn't start to stop to think about the bricks and the rock itself.
Yeah. Just this idea too of the being birthed from stone and that there's such heavy emphasis in
Yes.
Christian imagery and whether that emphasis comes from the Mithraic tradition that gets infused into it or these fractals developed separately but they're part of just this big crazy playground that is the reality that we inhabit. I'm not sure, but it seems to be there for me.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I can't believe I it's just kinda crazy. There's so much information. It's in front of my eyes the entire time. I don't see it. But yeah, the being born out of a rock and it's like the merger, right? It's the stone that's rolled away from the tomb and a reference to Mithras.
Right, which obviously Christ and Mithras
Yeah,
really get squashed together,
right.
at least from the culture we're surrounded with today is
Yeah, yeah.
obviously kind of merged both of them.
I remember as a kid, like, just watching this Eternal Flame or going to see it in person. Like, I try to get back into the mindset, like, when I was a kid, then I would see this. I intuitively knew that there was something religious, but I didn't know what to it. And I don't know if there's just the vibe I picked up on all the adults around me who are being so solemn around it, but it always kind of occupied like this nebulous religious category in my mind. And I wonder if that's telling at all.
Yeah, I think the energy can tell you a lot, and something doesn't have to be what we associate with religion to be the religion of our culture.
Yeah.
And when you're so deep in something, I'm not sure you really separate religion from reality. It's all one and the same if you take it seriously.
I just kind of figured that there was something vaguely Christian about it. And because I was a kid and hadn't read the Bible all the way through, that like there was something I didn't understand. And maybe a grown
Yeah.
up would explain it to me one day or something. And
Yeah.
then I became my own grown up.
The teddy bear is very apt in this
Oh,
moment.
yes, yes.
I love that you're still just holding
Yeah.
on.
No, I'm yeah, I'm going back in time.
Your companion.
This is my actual teddy bear from when I was, like, 2 years old. So
It's very sweet.
this teddy bear is, like, the same age as me. It's crazy.
Unfortunately, I lost my dear bunny, but
Mm. Alright, let's go to the next one. Do I have you reading here? I'm not sure. I think I do.
yes, you do.
Alright, so I will say this before we get going. I think I have Jordan reading for the next 2 slides. I've started I do enjoy making the collages, but just, like, on a whim, I was like, "Oh, okay, AI, like, what would you do?" You know? And I I don't know, you tell I'd be curious to hear some feedback. I feel like it's getting more it's getting a little bit more arty and a little bit more coherent. I think it's doing a pretty good job here. But you go ahead and read that caption.
This iconographic synthesis portrays the John F. Kennedy administration as a unified Mithraic liturgy, framing the 1960s as a transition from terrestrial sacrifice to solar triumph. Kennedy is depicted as the Heliodromus, Sunrunner, commanding the Quadriga to steer the American solar ego from the troctomy of the death of the bull, the 1963 assassination, toward the lunar Mithraeum of the conquest of the stars. Flanked by the dualism of Catopotes, the setting sun slash limousine, The cottis, the rising sun, and astronauts, the composition illustrates the eternal flame as the spark released from the quote rock or genetrix that fuels the Saturn V, the Mithraic dagger used to pierce the celestial sphere. Ultimately, the landing of the eagle at the lunar zenith signifies a successful precession of the equinoxes, where the blood of the fallen leader acts as the sacred fertilizer for a new space-bound consciousness.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty effective. I mean, I think it really brings it home here. I checked in on Instagram, and I think Osik is trying to get in. I don't know if he wants to interrupt or whatever, but just to give you a heads up to look at the panel. But I think this effectively gets. I mean, really, my only quibble with the way that the AI has done this image here is that it's given JFK 3 horses rather than the 4 of Apollo. Um, and we'll go a little bit deeper into what some of the imagery here is with Carl Jung. So why don't we go ahead and do that one as well? I like that. I think this might be my favorite of them. Actually, maybe my second favorite. So will you read that as well?
Absolutely.
Unless you need a moment to.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
This interpretation reads the president of JFK and the early US space program through a Jungian and Mithraic symbolic lens, treating political ritual and technological achievements as expressions of archetypes emerging from the collective unconscious, theorized by Carl Jung in symbols of transformation. Jung drew partly on his famous solar phallus case, in which a psychiatric patient described a vision of a sun with a phallic extension long before Jung later encountered a similar motif in an ancient Mithraism text, which he interpreted as evidence that symbolic patterns can arise spontaneously from a shared psychic substrate. Within this framework, Mithraic imagery such as petrogenesis, the god's birth from rock, symbolizes consciousness emerging from the unconscious, while solar figures represent renewal, illumination, and heroic mediation between darkness and order. Kennedy's rhetoric about the torch passed to a new generation evokes the solar imagery of Sol Invictus and casts him symbolically as a youthful sun hero guiding a new historical era during the Cold War. The pattern continues in the Apollo 8 mission, which reached lunar orbit on December 25th, traditionally associated with the birth of Mithras. Whether when astronaut Frank Borman, Jin Lovell, and William Anders read from the book of Genesis while circling the moon,
Yeah.
symbolically transforming the mission into a modern initiation, emerging from cosmic darkness. In this reading, the mythic naming of the Apollo program and the towering Saturn V rocket echo archetypes of the solar hero's ascent and generative power, while the JFK Eternal Flame, installed by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, serves as a final symbolic seal, fixing the hero's torch of light into stone and preserving the archetype beyond the life of the individual.
Yeah. I mean, look, we've covered this. I mean, I think one of the new insights to include here is that one of the personal anecdotes that Jung includes that proved the collective unconscious to him is they had this this schizophrenic patient that described the sun as having this solar phallus that was picked up by or was propelled by the wind. And why Jung thought that was so interesting is that when he was reading over the Mithraic liturgy, in a very obscure passage, it described it exactly as his patient did. And there was no way that the patient would have had access to that. Jung himself felt like he was one of the first individuals to ever find this. And in addition to that,
Ah,
yeah,
but it's messier than that,
I
by the
think
way.
you've been reading that Richard Knoll book, so you know what I'm talking about. I think he critiques this argument, doesn't he?
Yes, and I am very much generalizing, and it's an amazing book, by the way. I highly recommend
Which
it.
one are
I
you
was
reading again?
The Cult of Jung.
Okay.
I'm forgetting the author's name at this moment,
Richard
but
Knoll.
we
He
can
has
pull it up.
another one
Richard No, that's right.
that I've been thinking about reading because as if I have time to read all these books called The Aryan Christ in reference
Mm.
to Jung.
Yeah, I'm sure that's excellent as well. It's very well researched. Uh, just to broadly summarize
Yeah,
what
what's
I
he say?
remember
Yeah.
is really he's kind of painting the picture that Jung is kind of grab bagging and at worst, maybe even fabricating some of the clinical examples. And in fact, he's really pulling from these traditional lineages, these esoteric lineages that he would have been exposed to growing up in the region he did, in the families he's in the culture that he's in. These ideas would have been known to him. Is and I could be generalizing a little bit too much, but this particular case in like the phallus example in particular is one that Knoll critiques specifically. And he sort of argues that Jung was trying to find clinical, more scientific, vanilla, acceptable ways of packaging and convincing what you'd call today as normies
Mm.
of these more esoterically rooted ideas.
So that's an interesting question. He's like, "Oh, I gotta talk to a mental patient to see if they're tapping into the collective unconscious and describing these things." And I'm like, "Oh, here's the evidence, all we need. Just look at the Apollo program. It's Mithraism." E but
Yeah,
would
I'm
this
not
does this
saying it's
pass
not
as
there.
evidence? Does this pass as evidence to anybody? There somebody
It
go
dep
someone go, "Oh, that's an interesting coincidence. That's an interesting coincidence." I'm an NPC. Like,
I mean, of course, I'm with you. I see these synchronicities and fractals playing out all around me. It's undeniable to me. I think, it makes sense to me that Knoll wants to sit down and really put Young's feet to the fire on these specific examples that have been hyped up a ton in psychology and used as the basis of these ideas. And it's not necessarily the case that these ideas are wrong, but his exposure is more about the origin of where these ideas come from, if that makes sense.
mhm,
And it's, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but when, it's not like you knew all of these scholarly terms of these other concepts and some of these authors that are getting pulled into the AI, right? That use specific language that then we can kind of expand upon. You know, they're not things that you were familiar with before, but it's also an attempt, and this is not a criticism in a way. Um, by the way, I'm not trying to be like combative, but it also is a reflection, I think, of wanting to find more acceptable language that more people might be open to,
yeah,
which is not inherently bad. But I think from Noel's perspective, it does matter to be honest about the origins of where these ideas come from. And additionally, the clinical population that Jung specifically was working with would have been more exposed to this Aryan Christ like mythic soup. So we're not talking about a random sample around the world. We're talking about a smaller slice of humanity who is surrounded by Germanic folklore,
yeah.
which a lot of it is this solar myth.
Well, it's interesting to think about all these individuals like the schizoid patient who were tapping into the Mithraism. Like, are we constantly tapping into the Mithraism? Are we constantly tapping into all these other mythologisms that we've talked about here? Or did the reality work through people in such a way it's like, okay, now we hardcore introduce the Mithraism? I think there might be arguments to say that it's like perpetually occurring. But that is a question that I have. So what
Yeah,
yeah,
I think the null argument is it's not a sufficient data point on its own. I don't think you can really rule out one or the other of what you just said from what we have in front of us. And at the end of the day, I don't think we can really persuade people who are not having a spiritual experience
yeah,
day to day
yeah,
that any of this is real.
yeah. Well, I like this art, by the way. This is one of my
I do
favorites.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, this stuff used to be like pulling teeth
Yeah, it used to be
to
really
get.
bad. It's getting really good. Like having the collective unconscious like portrayed as the cave here that Jung is in, and right, like associating the rock and the moon of Mithras like emerging from it, right? And the torch and its similarity to the rocketry. This is really good. This is really good.
It is.
I really I hype up the AI sometimes. I mean, I can do this just with collage, but it's not as seamless. I like this a lot. I think about whether or not I'm going to include these in my book. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right. So, digging into all this Mithraism and thinking about the eternal flame got me wondering about a few things, specifically about the connection between King Arthur, Mithras, and JFK. So, I have said in previous podcasts that Jackie got the idea for the eternal flame. By the way, it's really striking to me like how quickly the funeral came together. Like, and I thought maybe there was like maybe a couple weeks between her and that interview that she did for Life magazine, where she talks about, she says, "Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot." I thought there was like a couple weeks to process everything. 5 days later, November 29th, she meets with um, Theodore H. White to have that conversation. It's like, okay, we've got this good to go. And they had, 2 days after the assassination, they had the eternal flame. But I digress. I talked about it earlier that the inspiration was from the memorial in France that she saw. It's actually from a multiplicity of sources. And one of them, wouldn't you know, is from the other T.H. White's series on King Arthur. Is from I guess there were 4 books. And the 4th book is called The Candle in the Wind. It's a fantasy novel by English writer T.H. White, the 4th book in the series, The Once and Future King, written in 1940. It was first published in 1958 in the collected edition. So, and I'm sure it's worth reading. It says here in Wikipedia, it deals with the last week of Arthur's reign, his dealings with his son Mordred's revolts, Guinevere and Lancelot's demise, his perception of right and wrong. I haven't even read the first one in this series, but clearly you can see it's tying a bow on the Arthur story, and that the Candle in the Wind is going to be a reference to the eternal flame that Jackie puts in Arlington Cemetery. So I started thinking about this, like, is this shining moment on the hill the eternal flame? Yeah, it is. Partially. So it draws it even tighter to the actual monument is an actual reference. At least 25% of it is a reference to the Arthurian legend in T.H. White's books, who then she discloses with the other T.H. White in Life magazine. I'm like, I feel like saying this makes it look like I'm on crazy pills, but this is true. Not to mention a big story, a big part of the story from the King Arthur legend is the rescuing the sword from the stone. Like the future king is actually able to draw this stone or draw the sword from the stone. That sounds a lot like the petrogenesis of Mithras. So I think you could make the case. I've not gone deep into it. You could make the case that the Arthurian legend, especially given that it's so masculine, could have Mithraic connections. And we've also looked at how the Mithras religion spread up to England through the Roman military. I think that this would be a very interesting thing to research, whether or not it came out of that tradition. Now, someone else we've talked about periodically here is Jessie L. Weston with her book, From Ritual to Romance. Okay. And I'm not to this chapter yet. I think I'm on chapter 10. I've read it before, but it was a long time ago before I started doing this. And chapter 12 is actually on Mithras and Attis. And so she's got a whole chapter, and I'm not super versed in how she does this, where she's going to connect both Mithras and Attis back to the Grail legend. So this Mithric element is this bridge between King Arthur and JFK we're seeing. Something else I want to mention here, and we talk about how eternally present all this Mithraic symbolism is. We've looked at like the overhead views of like Dealey Plaza, but I was looking at an overhead view of the layout of DC because I was, what was that? Where is it? How they've laid this out is that the JFK grave, the gravesite is there's a straight line through the Arc de Triomphe to the Lincoln Memorial. So that is yet another way that these two figures are drawn together. They're drawn together geographically, but then from that there's a little bit of an angle to the Washington Monument, to the to the phallus, to the solar phallus, which I think is going to be relevant when we talk about Osiris. And so I wonder if there is some sort of sacred geometrical narrative here between the eternal flame, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Washington Monument, given that phallus. I'm not exactly sure how to talk about it. One of the books I was able to get for cheap that does talk about this in detail is Nicholas Mann's The Sacred Geometry of Washington. Hopefully it'll get here this week and I'll have a follow-up for it. So I just thought this was interesting. The curiouser and curiouser it gets. The Candle in the
Oh,
Wind by
yes.
T.H. White.
Wow. We should find a esoteric DC tour.
Yeah. Oh, look,
Oh, there's the time
there
traveler.
we got our time.
I love it.
Did you put a watch on your headband and that makes
Yeah,
you and that's your time traveling device?
Yeah, that's I just tap it in and I arrive
I love
late
it.
in meetings.
Well, it's great because the fact that you are late feeds into the other thing. Jordan and I, we said this at the beginning, we had the time change here. And so we leaned into the, oh my God, we're not ready. We're wearing our pajamas sort of vibe.
Oh,
How does it work? Do you have a time change in India too? I thought I said that in the chat, but I guess not. So what time? So the time is the same there as it was yesterday?
why would there be a time change?
We have a
What's
time
happening in
change.
America?
I agree. It's
It's
dumb.
dumb. I think Woodrow Wilson is to blame. Twice a year we have a time change.
Okay.
Conspiracy theorists largely think it's just to mess with our biological clocks. And they don't do it right on the equinoxes. They do it a little bit off of the equinoxes. So it really messes with your ability to internalize reality around you as the seasons shift and as the daylight ratio shifts. I hate it.
I
Yeah,
love
it's
I love your
insane.
costume, by the way.
I do too. It's great.
Is your t-shirt relevant? What's on your t-shirt?
Don't
The
wait. The time will never be just right.
Oh my gosh. This is so
That's
great. This
good.
is so what's it called? Steampunk or something. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here in the first hour, Ostic. We've been developing certain aspects of the theory that I've been working on for my book, and we've begun to get into some of the Mithras content from Frazer. I think you'll jump in just fine. And what we were doing right here, as I was showing Jordan that at least partially found another source of inspiration for the Eternal Flame is T.H. White, the fourth book in the series on the Once and Future King. The fourth one was called The Candle in the Wind, and it's about the closure of Camelot. And this was a partial inspiration for the Eternal Flame. And we talked about some of the imagery associated with the Eternal Flame, the flame coming out of the rock as being symbolic of the petrogenesis of Mithras, and how that might also be connected to the stone being rescued from, the sword being rescued from the stone in the King Arthur story. Yeah.
There
All
are
right.
layers to it again and
Lots
again.
of layers. Lots of layers. Ooh. Okay. Let's go to the next one. What's next? I think, Jordan, you have some reading here. Is that right?
I do.
Okay.
The early church appears to have placed Christmas on December 25th to redirect devotion from the pagan birth of the sun to the birth of Christ, preserving the emotional power of an established solstitial festival while giving new theological meaning. A similar dynamic may have shaped Easter, since the death and rebirth of the Phrygian god Attis were celebrated near the spring equinox on March 21st, 4th through 25th. And some early Christian traditions likewise dated Christ's crucifixion to March 25th, despite the lack of historical basis. Together, these alignments suggest a broader strategy of liturgical substitution in which major Christian feasts mapped onto older seasonal festivals tied to the solstices and equinoxes, easing conversion by preserving ritual time while redirecting its meaning. The competition was especially visible with the cult of Mithra, whose solar associations and promise of immortality closely paralleled Christian themes, prompting early Christians to denounce the similarities even as the two traditions contested the same sacred dates.
Yeah. So you can see here why individuals grow skeptical of Christianity when it's like, wait, there are all these other traditions that also have December 25th as the birth of their hero, martyr figure, or whatever. This is highly problematic. Now, the a lot of medieval philosophers and early Christian philosophers had a retort to this. We're going to look at that next. It's a doctrine called diabolical mimicry. All right, and I want to think about the implications of that when we look at our present scenario. I do want to pause here and say there are individuals that think these dates, it's not that they were weeks off from one another. There are individuals who think that these dates are completely wrong. There's a lot of debate about when the birth of Christ actually happened. In addition to the March date that so much scholarship has been devoted to, I think I've said this in other podcasts, given because the Gospels themselves do not say, oh, Jesus was born on this day in this month. It doesn't say, but from the context clues, some individuals and astronomical alignments have reasoned that he may have been born on a particular day in September. And when we think about that from some of the esoteric decodes that we've done elsewhere, that is quite a revelation. There is a camp of people that argue that Jesus was in fact born on 9/11. Now, this has nothing to do with the stuff. Well, it has something to do, but it has nothing to do with what Frazer has to say here. He kind of takes it for granted that these seasons are kind of in the same ballpark. But just so people know, there is that debate and argument out there, and one that, given everything else, I'm inclined to listen to.
This is so fun and so relevant with our daylight savings time. And it just shows how powerful the manipulation of the calendar
Mm.
is on our day to day lives, on our spirituality, on our religious experiences. He who controls the calendar and gets everyone to agree with it is able to extol powers upon the entire population well
Yeah.
beyond, I think, what people could fathom prior to the usage of clocks and
Yeah.
calendars and these tools of synchronization.
Yeah.
Without it, you just have a bunch of individual humans being internally
Yeah.
guided and informed by the external reality around them. I think it's a layer of abstraction that really takes us away from our own individual experience that the seasons themselves tell you what's going on. The ground, the trees, they all tell you.
Well,
But
that's going to be important for us to think about when we look at Mikhail Bakhtin's chronotope idea and,
that's right.
and appropriating it for our purposes here with synchronicity. Um, I have plugged this channel before. I believe Ostic's gotten into it. The coherent worldview talks about this idea of Jesus being born on 9/11, which is particularly interesting. But let's
And many think it's the spring.
right. That's kind of the debate. Is that I think the majority agree that it's March. The minority thinks September, and then there's a minority within September that think it's 9/11. So okay, yeah, there's that channel again. This guy kind of deposited his findings and left, and I enjoy it.
Good for him.
Yeah,
That's maybe the
yeah,
best way to do it.
yeah. All right, so let's go to the next slide if we can. So I spoke about this idea of diabolical memory, and Jordan is going to read the caption here to contextualize it for us.
Early Christian apologists like Justin Martyr and Tertullian addressed the striking parallels between Christian sacraments and the rites of pagan deities, such as Mithras, Attis, and Adonis, through the doctrine of diabolical mimicry. Operating within a hierarchical framework of levels of time, they argue that while God exists in an eternal now, the devil and his demons are expert eavesdroppers bound within linear time who intercepted Old Testament prophecies regarding the coming Messiah. Lacking true foreknowledge, the devil allegedly used these stolen blueprints to plagiarize the future, establishing counterfeit mysteries such as Mithraic baptism or the ritual death of Attis, centuries before the incarnation. By planting these preemptive strikes in the pagan world, the demons aimed to delegitimize the unique historical priority of Christ, turning the spiritual landscape of the Roman Empire into a theological chess match where every divine move was met with a calculated, demonic imitation designed to mislead humanity.
Right. So I had the AI generate this image where it has Hal's finding at the end of war games. The only winning move is not to play. I find that to be potentially interesting if Hal is some sort of incarnate demon going up against God, and which is a conversation that we're having here with what is AI, some sort of channeling device. But it is an interesting idea. So, I mean, if God exists in a higher plane of reality, an eternal now, so my thought was, okay, does that mean that the demons, because Satan perhaps existed there once as well, and he knows things and he can get down on this terrestrial plane after being cast out and spread it all around? That's not really the idea so much. The idea is that goes back to the old expression that even the devil can quote scripture, that the devil knows the Bible uh, inside and out. And because he's so attentive to the prophecies that are in the Old Testament, like Isaiah and Ezekiel, etc., that he's actually able to, and because like time and space are not as difficult for him and his demons to traverse, he can go and spread these bastardized ideas around all over the globe, sort of like a diabolical internet, proto-internet, that existed. And so really the idea that the Mithraic cults, the Attis worship, all these other things existed prior to the incarnation of Christ is really not that big of a deal. It's just kind of sort of anticipating and sowing the seeds of disinformation before the thing that is inevitable shows up on the scene. I think I could see both sides of that. I can see an individual saying, "Oh gosh, that's cope." I could see someone saying that's cope, but I could also see that being potentially plausible if you take these spiritual realities to be true. I, I'm sympathetic to both sides. What's also interesting is that it perhaps would not, just thinking about this, and I don't have a name for it, but another type of diabolical mimicry could be the apocalypse itself. So it's not just that the Satan and the demons, etc., have air quotes foreknowledge. They don't really have foreknowledge. They're just very well studied and have lived thousands of years, so they know the cycles of existence. They know kind of a better sense of time of the average human. That they could also, if they wanted to, create a counterfeit apocalypse and a counterfeit antichrist and a counterfeit second coming of Christ. So it doesn't really just apply to the past. It wouldn't just apply to creating these counterfeit Christs for the first time that Christ comes. But you could potentially, if you were well studied enough, create an entire alternative apocalypse and potentially throw off people's expectations for when the real Christ was coming. And I think there's a lot of people going like, "Oh, we live in the apocalypse. Everything is very and there's a lot of biblical apocalyptic imagery that's going on in the reality right now. You can even say 9/11. It just so happens that there is a very apocalyptic verse in Revelation 9/11 where it talks about the angel of the abyss that seems to match up with elements of 9/11. Is that the real Revelation 9/11 or is that a counterfeit of it? So I just want to throw that idea out there. I would, if diabolical mimicry is true, and it's been done once before, if we are sympathetic to this perspective, why couldn't it be done again to get us on the wrong timeline so we're expecting the wrong thing? Thoughts from the crowd here.
I mean, if we accept it as true and play in that, it really, what can you take as real or not real? You kind of have to start cross applying that there might be demonic counterfeits in everything.
Yep.
Who do you trust?
Yeah. Osik, you're
I guess
from India.
the answer is God.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you think about this doctrine of diabolical mimicry, Osik? I suspect that you're going to be less sympathetic to this idea.
Yeah, I think it's they're trying to rationalize it. They're trying to show themselves as, people do that. They want to show themselves as we were the originators. These are the people. Even literally on the timeline, it's happening before you, but still you gotta be. I'm the first one. They cheated
Yeah.
from me from the future.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on. There has to be limits to these things. But like, I don't mind them thinking of themselves as that, but Yeah, that's fine. Some it's like people. I think it's done for sociological reasons, other than because I think when they would have found out that these things existed, and they did not want to associate them with their maybe their enemies were practicing these things. So they were like, how do we disassociate ourselves from them? Oh, we will, make up this argument. But yeah, fine. I don't have any problem with them trying to make this argument if
I,
it if people believe it.
That's kind of my gut reaction as well, and why I sort of said, you kind of have to start applying this everywhere. But I am very open to the bendingness that is available to the timelines and how malleable reality can be. That seems plausible. And it seems very plausible. I like this layers of time concept a lot. I think it's maybe being exclusively applied to one little narrow thing, at least in what we're exploring here. But I think it's an interesting concept.
I
Did
like
you
how
know
this.
this? Some Okay.
Go ahead, Austin.
Okay. Th- There was this movie called Tenet by Christopher Nolan,
Oh
and it had
yes,
this same kind of thing. Like somebody had plagiarized what's going to happen in the future, and then they tried to create their own world using that. So I think that idea, that sci-fi idea, still exists, and I feel it's very interesting that it had existed during the medieval times. That they were having these wild leaps of imagination. I'm not sure. I don't know if just that it still exists. It's still a thing that people talk about. Just
That's
that.
a great reference. And you today are seeing debates play out within some Christian, of course, niche communities about the validity to where we are on the Revelations timeline, and some critiques of, oh, we're in Satan little season. Some criticism I've heard is exactly this argument here, that it's fabricated by demonic forces, essentially, whether or not they use the phrase demonic specifically, but that it's, we're being tricked into believing that.
I personally think that we're much further along. If I show I've said this before, but I think we're way further along, and a lot of the apocalyptic events that we're being shown are to make us think that we're actually earlier in the timeline. My personal belief.
I'm partial to that as
Yeah.
well, but I find it interesting that this is still a debate today.
Yeah. It's interesting that we're getting this conversation about time. I hadn't really anticipated that when I chose the theme. It was just from daylight savings here. But what's also interesting, we think about God inhabiting eternal now. Christ, insofar as he's connected to that eternal now and he incurs into our reality, in some sense, he might be a little bit like a time traveler. So, anyhow, yeah.
Absolutely.
There's actually potentially some other elements of time travel in the Bible too. I think about that in regards to when oh, Enoch and Elijah are translated and do not die, and are supposedly supposed to reappear as the two witnesses. Like, in a sense, they time travel. They go to a different timeline and then come back into ours. So there you go. Okay. Let's proceed. What's next? Okay. So yeah, we can just look at the screen here. As I strive for even more rigor to talk about these subjects, there's some accreted meaning that comes out in it. So I think in general, what we're talking about here, I've given the name the theory of archetypal stochasticity. I'm saying. We've talked about this in a way that certain individuals act as like gravity wells that attract these different archetypes. But an idea that sort of occurred to me is like, why are they so polyvalent? Why are there so many different permutations of it? Why is it? We've been fixated on JFK here, looking at Attis and Mithras and Christ and Ulysses and all these other ones. That somehow, because we are living in a collective society, that there's kind of the appearance, a multiplicity of appearance to match that collective. And then the other idea that I was struggling with is that they don't perfectly manifest. And I guess this would be a subsumed axiom of this idea of the reflexive swerve, that there's not total actualization of the archetype as it erupts into reality. It's not like bam, everything like snaps into place. There seems to be some sort of resistance to the material reality, which is great in a way because it does preserve some domain of free will. But of course, and it prevents all of reality from becoming just like a puppet show for God, right? There is some limited scope for how agency can work, but this gets into deeper metaphysical questions. So, Jordan, if you could go to the next slide, and we'll have a discussion about this as we get to all of this. Um, Develop further this idea known as refractive freedom. Okay. And the way that I described it to the AI is kind of like when you have like a great a sculptor who has to work with the limitations of the medium that he's using, right? He can't just like think it and immediately is like what he wants, like whether or not he's working with marble or granite or some other substance, it's going to be somewhat of a limiting factor to what he can actually manifest into the reality, regardless of how great the craftsman is, right? And just briefly, how it's defined is the inherent non-deterministic power of the material substrate to bend, delay, or transform an archetypal constant. And in some way, this can account for why there isn't total actualization. Of course, this is going to get into deeper metaphysics, and I want to name check some of that. If we can go to the next slide, things that I'm not as well versed in, but I think we're going to have to take a look at. So if you can go to the next slide, Jordan. So here, two individuals that might be of interest for us when we look at this are Whiteheadian process theology, right? This idea of 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 how form actually interacts with reality. I'm not some sort of deep acolyte of Whitehead, but this is one particular place that we can go. Now, I think, given the very preliminary research that I've done, there is the ascribing of some type of entity or potential consciousness to matter in the way that he schematizes things. That might be one way to go. Okay, the other would also be the friction from formal causation, the friction of becoming that is talked about with Aristotle and the way that form and matter interact. And then, of course, there's going to be how Plato understands these things. But as we get deeper into this, we can go into all the deepness of it. I'm not super prepared to have a profound conversation of it. Is like, really, what is the relationship between form and matter? Are we to think about form as like completely contained within the mind of God, and then it is imposed upon this matter, and then there is resistance to it? Okay. Are we supposed to understand the matter as being separately existing or independent of God? Is it an extension of his being? What is matter in relation to God if we have this panentheistic framework that's going on? I'm not sure if all this stuff is going to be paradoxes and contradictory, but I think these are going to be some of the things that will have to be reconciled.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Austin, what do you
Did
think
you come
about
up with
this?
that formula yourself, or like did the AI help you with that?
It helped me. It's
I
just
mean,
a
you
back and
had,
forth negotiation.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah. That was interesting.
yeah. I mean, I haven't much more played out. It's, I haven't much. So really, I talked about this earlier in the presentation. The way that I'm using AI is like a collaborative writer. Like I'll be like, look, here's a problem that I'm having with this issue. For instance, next presentation, I'll probably talk about how this is all very intriguing, but we have this problem with form and matter. And I'm struggling with how to think about it. It'll put forward some ideas. I respond, critique, and it's a negotiation. But as far as like the complex mathematical formula that you're speaking about, that's all the AI. So we kind of take turns naming things and incorporating things. And this gets into our larger conversation about what it means to write when you have a collaborative agent like this. I don't know if you have any strong feelings about that. Is that writing? Is that not writing?
You're gonna have to get your content somehow.
Yeah.
It's just a motorcycle. Earlier you used to walk to the libraries. Now it's like you have a bike. Just make things faster.
Yeah.
It's not that you're delegating the thinking to it. You're always interacting with the content of the world.
Mm. Yeah.
It's the memory of the world
Yeah.
that has existed before you.
It is an ongoing conversation. Yeah. Why don't we take 5? Is that okay, guys?
Sounds
All
great.
right.
Thank you.
Now. So, um, a lot of people have observed this uncanny connection to all these different shootings that Catcher in the Rye has. And it's no stranger to the Kennedy assassination. Apparently, a dog-eared copy of it was found amongst Oswald's belongings. And of course, this brings into mind all sorts of things in regards to the calendar, but also the other work of Robert Burns. Now, Robert Burns, as I mentioned at the outset, was the poet that inspired the title of Salinger's text. His poem was called "Catcher Through the Rye," and when we look at this, we've looked at Burns in relation to having the poem John Barleycorn, which is relevant to a type of European Attis worship and festival, and we've looked at that in previous episodes. Something I did not include in that discussion was that Robert Burns in the 18th century also wrote a poem to, you guess it, Mr. John Kennedy. So we have at least 3 Robert Burns poems that are in direct or indirect ways connected to the figure of John F. Kennedy. Now, I'm not exactly sure who this John Kennedy was that Robert Burns was writing to. He warns him about the deceptive nature of women in the poem, which you could possibly interpret as an allusion to the affair that or the affairs of JFK. And he also encourages him to drink deeply of Johnny Brews, which is a cross reference to John Barleycorn, as if it's some sort of communal sacrament, the ingestion of this spirit that John Kennedy will become, that he will become the John Barleycorn figure that we've looked at as far as having connections to the Dallas Dealey Memorial put together by Philip Johnson. Okay, and that is pretty insane in and of itself. Not to mention that there is mention of flames in John Barleycorn, which could then possibly be connected to the eternal flame in Arlington Cemetery. And that got me thinking a little bit more about the onomancy of both J.D. Salinger and Holden Caulfield. We talked about this onomantic analysis at the very beginning. Ostick, I think you'll have to go back and watch this, but something I mentioned at the very beginning is that I found out that a man named Frazer actually drove Oswald to the Texas School Book Depository that day in November. So it was just another connection that we have between Sir James Frazer and the JFK event. But I was thinking about the name Holden Caulfield, and I was like, oh, field. And it does turn out that it is connected to a cornfield in English etymology. And the Holden is connected to either like a deep valley or abyss. And we can understand that as the slaughter in the grain field, a linguistic blueprint for the vegetative sacrifice, barleycorn, and the ritual harvest of the sacred king, mapping the Kennedy tragedy into the death cycles of the Golden Bough. That's potentially one way that you could read this as having the main character of Catcher in the Rye read that way. Not to mention, J.D. Salinger is Jerome David Salinger. And Jerome means sacred. David is like the beloved king. And Salinger is the salt healer. And the salt actually has something to do when we think about alchemy. So we could say the high priest of the beloved king, born on the day. And J.D. Salinger is born on New Year's, which is interesting because one of the most famous poem of Robert Burns, which we've not talked about here, is Auld Lang Syne, right? So J.D. Salinger not only gets his source of inspiration for Catcher in the Rye, but he actually also from the calendar connects back to Burns' other favorite poem. And then the salt obviously has something to do with the alchemical process. And then finally, or maybe penultimately, just the idea that Burns is just phonetically, etymologically, part of this fractal, this mix, I think it says something not only to the barleycorn figure, but to the eternal flame itself, which burns to this day. And you could say, ooh, you could groan and say that's not strong enough. And Ostic, you provoked me last time to develop a matrix of evaluation of evidence, and these sorts of onomantic noticings would kind of be part of that tier one evidence. You'll have to go back and tell me what you think about how that's structured. But I think that I would submit that as evidence for that tier one assessment. And finally, Holden Caulfield himself wears a red hunting cap, which may, in some ways, given how we've talked about the initiation elements of Catcher in the Rye and its connections to Freemasonry. And I'm not some expert in this, but I suppose that Mithraic condition persists in Freemasonry. We might even start to see the hunting cap of Holden Caulfield connected to the Phrygian hat and the Mithraic hat of Mithras. So I find these all to be very interesting. They're their own separate little bits of analysis here. But this is what I mine from the depths in regards to Robert Burns' connection to JFK. So I'll take some insight from the rest of you guys.
Like, what is this poem about? Even the one about Kennedy. It's written in a very southern dialect, I
It's
think.
it's kind of it's a very Scotch Irish poem. I try to have my friend who's Irish read this because the Ulster Irish community would have been able to translate this appropriately, and I wanted to catch the whole um, essence of it. But it's
Now, if
essentially
you
like,
ran a while.
yeah, it's like it's kind of like advice and guidance. You know, if you read deeper into it, he tells him not to judge things by appearances, to not present yourself as mere appearance, but to go with authenticity and truth, and to stay away from women and um yeah, stuff like that. Stuff like that. I would say if there weren't already the connections between John Barleycorn and Catcher in the Rye to the JFK assassination, I I don't know if I would give this as much weight, but because he clearly has a poem addressed specifically to this man, I think some more ringing of it has to be done.
Also, there's this connection of Catcher in the Rye to 2001: Space Odyssey.
Oh, tell us about it.
His surname Holden Caulfield. Like, if you think about Call, so when a baby is born in the sac of the mother, there's sac of the in the mother's womb that protects the baby. Sometimes babies are born with that sac without it breaking up, and the babies that are born with that, they're called N call. So he's like that star child at the end of the 2001.
Yeah.
That baby was also in mother's amniotic sac. I mean, if you look at it in that way, that he was a baby because they're seen as divine babies. They're still, kind of different. They are have this kind of force field around them. So I looked at it and thought like that had some sort of connection. And since this whole book is about maybe Freemasonry, it's I mean, not the whole book, a part of it is about that initiation. So I think that was appropriate, and I thought that that its connection to 2001 was also appropriate in that regard. That star child is actually some sort of a divine or special chosen one creature in that way, that he has now ascended. Because a lot of people try to talk about 2001 as also a Masonic allegory, that you are ascending levels of consciousness in that way. So there's that. And yeah, I mean, this hunting cap, now looking at it seems so distinctive. Just the image of that boy with that red hunting cap. So yeah, I never thought about it. I never imagined him with this kind of look. I imagined him quite differently. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, there's also, so Robert Burns was a very proud and pronounced Freemason as well. It's not just that there's like a Freemasonic ritualistic element within Catcher in the Rye. Burns himself was a member of the lodge, which is potentially relevant here. You know, I think a lot of people try to take ideas. They're like, "Oh, Luke, what are you saying?" Like, I think there might be some individuals who try to extrapolate from this and say, "Oh, look, the whole, this is like the Hoffman idea that like the whole thing was like a Freemasonic design," which I've said earlier doesn't really matter to me because it's subsumed between the larger unfolding of eternity and time. So I don't really, it doesn't really bother me that that element may or may not be there. The some of the potentially one other connection too is I not a lot of people know about this. Well, I guess increasingly more people do. Is that the other person that supposedly was killed by Oswald that day was named J.D. Tippit, and that's interesting that we have J.D. Salinger associated with this as well. I started to do a little bit of a onomantic analysis of J.D. Tippit's name, and it's a little bit difficult because even though there is this idea, which is intriguing on a lot of different levels, that the JD and JD Tippett means Jerome, or means not Jerome, not Jerome. It means Jefferson Davis. Although there's no real proof of that. That his name was actually just J and D. And apparently, this was. I mean, Jordan could possibly speak to this. That this was like a pretty common practice in the South. That you just gave people initials rather than actual names. I never heard of that outside of this one particular context, but that's what the story is. And he does kind of bear this uncanny resemblance to JFK as well. So, what if we were to step back and say, okay, there's all this stuff with Salinger and Burns circling JFK and the assassination? I mean, what are we supposed to say about this? Like, I mean, Hoffman and whatnot are going to be like, okay, well, this is clearly um, evidence of designed ritual, potentially Freemasonic in nature. I'm not really sure that's what I'm saying. Um, but I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say exactly at this point. I think it's deeper than that. I mean, it's a lot of
This
effort to go to. There's a lot of effort to go to just to give that type of signaling.
uh,
I mean, we got
this poem
Burns
could
right.
also okay,
I
just
guess
that
I was
this
trying to
poem
say,
could also apply to his son as well. Just that.
yeah. I mean, it was just a posit that like Burns had some sort of foreknowledge that there would be this ritual that would go on in Dealey Plaza in like the late 1700s when he wrote Mr. John Kennedy. Am I supposed to believe that? Or am I supposed to believe that Burns was selected and in some way woven into the ritual because he already had this poem and he had the connections and like this is just going to be this great little Easter egg that we're going to hide for people? Like that sounds kind of insane too. Like this feels more like this is just the fabric of the Matrix.
Hmm.
Jordan, what do you think? You haven't weighed in on this.
I don't have much to add, and I don't know much about the initials not like being blank initials. That I'm not familiar with that, but maybe I'm not from the correct class for
Yeah.
that to be super common. And where I'm from, everybody's name is like one or two syllables. But yeah, I mean it's a cool poem. I think it's interesting.
I mean, and part of the other reason, which we'll look at closer here with Bakhtin, is that, I mean, the other way that Catcher in the Rye syncs with JFK is that it was published, I believe, on July 16th, 1953 or 51, and that predates the Apollo 11 launch on July 16th, 1969, and then also potentially foreshadows the death of JFK Jr. on July 16th, 1999. So all this is this Burns and Salinger in this text are all sort of bound up, dating back 300 years. I don't know, or 250 years. Let's go to the next side and look at this chronotope. I believe we're looking at chronotopes now. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Why don't you read that caption for us on the
In
right
his
side or the left side? I'm sorry.
yeah. In his essay, Forms of Time and the Chronotope in the Novel, Bakhtin identifies the chronotope of the castle as a space saturated with the past, where ancestral history is so physically thickened into the architecture that it compels the repetition of specific dynastic dramas. Our framework extends this to the psychic chronotope, a metaphysical architecture within the calendar where specific dates, like July 16th, act as temporal castles that inevitably attract and replay the same archetypal rituals across centuries.
So this is really just giving a little bit of a theoretical background and some nomenclature to a phenomenon I've talked about for a long time. Like when I have just reams and reams and reams of these different calendrical synchronicities, but I think it makes sense to call them calendrical chronotopes, even though it really only makes sense within the theory of the novel of Bakhtin. I don't think he ever really meant to apply this to the larger reality. I'm not some great expert on this person. I've watched a few videos, but is the idea it's like a writing technique and how um, linear time doesn't matter as much, that there's an essence that permeates through cyclical time. So if there's like the ancestors like bleed through, say, the castle or the domicile that an individual is within and sort of becomes part of the story. And that seems to be kind of what we're looking at here as well. And so I just kind of engaged in this. I was like, well, let's try this out. And we can go to the next slide if you like. I said, let's try this out.
Actually,
There's
I'd like,
Oh, sure. You can weigh in here. I
yeah.
wanted to keep the conversation going and do some application, but if you want to do that's okay.
Yeah, well, really, I just want to talk about the concept of these time castles, temporal castles, and these psychic chronotopes. This puts kind of fancier language, or rather a refinement, on just calling everything an egregore, which
Mm,
is sort of been my go-to to describe it. In reality transurfing, Vadim Zealand, he refers to things as pendulums, where a bunch of psychic energy gets pointed at a particular thing, whether it be a political party, that would be an easy example. And then it has sort of this psychic weight that pulls people in and can heavily impact your lived experience unless you take some efforts to dissociate yourself from said pendulum or chronotope. So I don't know. I just think this is interesting. It's a concept I think about a lot. And it's almost like seeing these density clusters of
mm,
psychic
yeah,
energy. And when they get enough weight and enough momentum, they sort of behave on their own.
yeah.
So it's like this big snowball just rolling and rolling and rolling and growing.
Well,
I
this goes
think
back
it's
yeah, that's a great way to talk about it, and this goes back to our conversation about the social constructed nature of the calendar, right? Where primitive people were probably just looking at, seasons in nature itself for the rhythms of life. They weren't sitting here and being like, "Okay, there's like 28 days in every month or 30 days in every month or whatever." Um, but what it speaks to is that once something like this enters into social convention, right, has been established, it's like kind of free reign for the collective unconscious to take advantage of. It's like, thank you, I'll use that to
Mhm.
speak to you through. And then it's like, okay, well, what else is it doing?
Yeah.
If it can take the calendar and start transmitting a message, God, this sounds so insane. Starts transmitting a message through dates. What else could it seize a hold of? Well, yeah, I talked about earlier, the car that picked up Oswald. Frazer picks up the car or picks up Oswald in his 1954 Bel Air car. It's a Bell, which is a reference to Beltane and Marduk, right? This is an ancient deity.
Mhm.
You just take a it can take an old car, or like if we were to think about the limo. I have a slide on this that I want to do at some point, but everybody knows. Oh, isn't it interesting that JFK got assassinated in a Lincoln memo, further establishing the parallelism between these two men? Well, what's even more interesting about it, you look at the logo, right, which is word, right? Logo, logos, right? You look at the logo for the Lincoln, it's a crosshairs and a cross, right? I noticed this when I took my car in to get serviced and I was looking down at the mat and it had the Lincoln. I don't drive a Lincoln, but it also serviced Lincolns. And I was looking down at the mat. I was like, this is a crosshair and a cross. And both of those are relevant to the JFK assassination because the 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 rifle had to be sighted, and also the Christic imagery of JFK. It's it Everything seems to be available to the collective unconscious to take advantage of. Even a calendar that hasn't maybe been around as since the beginning of time.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think this phenomena is going to work through absolutely anything that enough attention is focused on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're clearly. I mean, we're clearly. Think about the psychic attention that we devoted to daylight savings today. By the way, I meant to say this. That's a huge Mandela effect, and I know Ostic. It probably won't resonate with Ostic because they don't have it there. But I was telling Jordan about this last night. Everybody today is talking about daylight savings. Oh, I overslept because of daylight savings, savings. It's never been savings on this timeline. It's saving, daylight saving time. And so the deletion of that S, like, kind of changes the meaning of it. It makes you wonder if something's interfering with the metaphysics of time in order to save reality itself. It's like something is messing with um uh, a causality. I've always
Absolutely.
I've always contended that there's a message in these Mandela effects, and that seems to be a pretty big one. To go from daylight savings time to daylight saving time. Who is daylight? And they are saving time from what? Okay. All right. Let's look at these chronotypes a little closer. Okay. So working this out with the AI, I was like, I just plugged it. I was like, look, let's apply this idea of chronotypes to some dates that I just know off the top of my head. I've got much more information on them, but okay, we've looked at July 16th, July 26th, November 22nd, and some of them interact in some ways. Like July 16th, I mentioned already earlier, but July 26th, you know, we see that's the birth of Young and Kubrick and Aldous Huxley. November 22nd, it's like this major death day with JFK being taken out, but also C.S. Lewis and Aldous Huxley, who kind of spans both of them. And the AI came up with these terms for thinking about these differently. He talked about a threshold knot in regards to July 16th, a natal knot in regards to July 26th, a terminal knot in regards to November 22nd, and a symmetry knot. That's the way that we're talking about this, me and the AI going back and forth. But it defines the threshold knot, a prog or portal where radical, irreversible transitions occur between two states of being. And I mentioned earlier the Trinity test, Apollo 11, JFK Jr. in the publication of Catcher in the Rye. Fuses technological fire with a literary script to trigger a physical ritual transformation of the species. It seems something about that seems to be coming through July 26th. And then with the bursts on July 16th, and then with the bursts on July 26th, we could possibly call that like the inception, a biological seeding of bursts that introduce new visionary software, psychology, cinema, drugs into the collective. And with the terminal knot, the dissolution, a synchronized removal of the word and the sword to create a psychic vacuum for a total cultural reset. And then with the symmetry knot, where Huxley is born and dies on two of these, on this natal and terminal knot, it's like it's the transmission uses a single life path to bridge the visionary and sacrificial nodes, acting as a psychic circuit breaker. I think a lot of these ideas have to be stress tests, but there's clearly going to be a lot of things that don't seem to obviously match these. Like there's going to be some events and births and deaths that seem completely irrelevant to these types of categorizations, but when they cluster, and they seem to cluster in this significant way, are we supposed to not notice? Are we supposed to just like be, oh yeah, like it's a weird world, moving on, I've got bills to pay? What are we supposed to do this outside of like, okay, maybe there is a larger message here being communicated through the calendar? I'll pause there and let Ostic give us some thoughts, because he's probably a little bit more skeptical. What do
No,
you
no,
think,
no.
my man? What do you think?
I really like that idea of you pointing out the synchronicity in the logo of the Lincoln car.
You like that?
So yeah, I like that because I don't know, maybe my defenses were low around this time or something. It just penetrated in my head, and I could sense that it's like the universe is aligning with that decision. Okay, he's gonna
Yes.
be in that Lincoln car
Yeah.
when this will happen. Even if people are, manipulating reality, there's this underlying bigger reality, like a wave that's pushing it onto the surface. that sort of that was compelling for me because
Good.
I had to, because I think because you were not trying to push that idea and I had to think about it myself, so I arrived at it. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's a good image.
Am I supposed to, yeah, are we supposed to believe that a secret society chose that car with that
Yeah, yeah.
logo? Like, how much control at a certain point you start turning the other choice is to start positing that everyone who's a part of these secret societies are like fallen angels or like gods or something. Like,
Yeah.
or you could just say this is God.
Also
I
like
think
this
it's
idea. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's I agree with that. And I think that particular thing, because it did not push it to me and I had to like rationalize it myself, then I was able to arrive it faster. It's like that coincidence, how could it be? Who could explain that? Yeah, I mean that then I kind of warmed up to that idea more than I would normally would. If you had said that, are we to believe that secret societies are doing this? I was like, okay. Yeah, I'm just giving a little feedback. Okay. This one I also like because of the zeitgeist thing. I think we don't. It's like it's kind of not real, but it's real. It's ephemeral, like the Aldous Huxley thing. He arrived at a time that he arrived before all that drug explosion, and he foresaw everything that's gonna come, and he's like this. He's in a very privileged, special place. He literally saw the future, in my opinion, and he literally lived it. And I don't think many people would have had access to mescaline or something during the 1950s, but he had that, and he used it to kind of make prophecies about the world ahead. And I think that was part of a zeitgeist, and it's like it's real. It's not that he was not just some random guy. He had that whole life around him was conducing him to become that person. It's like the world was conspiring for him to become that person and then tell it to the world and announce it. And those ideas were then, being spread out by other actors. It's like some people are chosen in this world to have some ideas, I think. It's like the circumstances align in such a way that you kind of have that opportunity and that access and that even the time and energy to give wings to those ideas. And like some people are in that special place. I think these ideas are all around us. Every part of since we have existed, these ideas have been around us, but let people catch them. It's like how David Lynch talks about it. He's like, it's like catching a fish, like keeping it
D-
with you and not losing it
yeah,
and then sticking with it.
and it definitely raises a very interesting question about whether or not his prophecies were or the collective unconscious could speak through him as a result of his experimentation with mescaline and other drugs. And what that actually means. I mean, this is like, I think, a somewhat rare phenomenon, right? Like, it's not like everybody who's engaging in these psychoactives is like having this um, effect on the future. Although we looked at Stuart Brand, who took LSD and was able to generate the blue marble by incentivizing NASA to actually get a photograph of it, right? Like it does happen occasionally. It does happen occasionally. And then that
Yeah.
raises a very interesting question. Like, is the collective unconscious like using like drugs or what role do drugs play in God's creation?
I think you have to be at a certain level before engaging
Yeah.
in drugs. It's like
Yeah.
people talk about when I was 18, I used to read Burroughs, the William S. Burroughs books. And I thought like, oh, he's doing drugs. I'll also do drugs. Then I thought like it will make him more creative. And I did a few. I did not go all the way, but then I realized that he was already a good writer out of Harvard. And he had so much free time. He had this inheritance, this unbelievable inheritance. He could throw away his money, rot in a bed, taking heroin all day long. Oh yeah. Oh, there are firecrackers. The team has won the World Cup. So
Oh, that's what that is. It's like there's
yeah,
firecrackers. What
yeah,
World
yeah.
Cup has been soccer?
Cricket World Cup.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah. It was a
who
boring
did you
match. We won too convincingly.
who did you beat?
New Zealand.
Oh, well, there we go. There we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
just I don't know what I was talking about, but yeah,
So, oh,
it's
you
like
were talking
you
about
have to be at a
burrows and
certain level
drugs.
before
Yeah.
that. You
Yeah.
have to be a certain level before getting drugs. It's gonna take you to the next level. But if you're like an empty vessel, it's gonna uh, make you hollower.
Mhm. Well, I think it's great insights. I think we have what? Do we have Oh, we have 2 more slides and we've got about 16 minutes. Is that right, Jordan?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. This the next the next slide, I mean, this is astrology stuff. I didn't go deep into it, but I just wanted to illustrate that possibly if we were actually feeling confident about these different types of chronotopes, and maybe Jordan, you could say something about, what we could do with the astrological aspect of this, because when you start to match it up, like I looked at the July 16th, and you may dispute whether or not this is right, but apparently that's a zodiacal position cusp of Cancer, the gateway of men. So that kind of makes sense that these transitional events happen. And the primary planetary ruler is the moon. How interesting that is if we have the Apollo 11 moon launch on July 16th, 1969. Um, and I don't know about
Because
this.
there's the 6-9 in it.
Oh, I guess so. I hadn't thought about that. And that's the Cancer sign. Interesting. So maybe there's just layers within this that I'm not even picking up on. Like the numbers themselves of the calendar might be relevant. That's really good. That's really good. Um, and then July 26, we have Leo ruling that. The primary planetary ruler is the sun. And I mean, perhaps this has something to do with bringing light into the world through these visionaries. And then, of course, with November 22nd, we've looked at this before, it being a Scorpio Sagittarius cusp thing where we have um, Pluto. I guess it's a shared thing. I'm not exactly sure, but you have Pluto and Mars ruling over it. We've looked at the Pluto element as far as how that potentially relates to the myth of Adonis and Persephone. So I don't know. This is all very tentative. This is just a sketch, and we can go further into the details. But if we are going to go with these different chronotope knots, I wonder what the next move is in terms of trying to link it up with astrology. I haven't gotten any further than that. I just played with it. I just found it very interesting that this Cancer thing, the moon thing dropped out. It was just intriguing that these connections happened. I don't know what else to say about it. So I'm going to hand that over to Jordan, see if she's got something interesting to say.
Yeah, I mean it's a fun topic. I think it plays directly into what you were saying before about it's going to use all these systems
Yeah, why
regardless
couldn't
of
it?
what they
Yeah,
are.
why couldn't the collective unconscious use an astrological system? If it's going to use the calendar, then why not do that too?
Right. In a way too, I'm still sorting out what I think astrology really is, but at minimum, it's an agreed upon set of symbols. It's a language used
But
throughout time.
but isn't it this idea that like certain energies come through the certain gates and stars at certain points?
That
And
is
I
one perspective on astrology. There are many.
really can you enlighten us?
There's like a 4-hour video this
well,
guy has done that
just
goes through.
TLDR.
Well, I'm just saying there's many different theories about the mechanism
Yeah.
behind astrology that presume different traits about reality. And many of them overlap or share different questions we've been asking through this whole presentation, this entire series. You know how you go through the different tiers and talk, you're kind of talking about different mechanisms that reality operates by. We're observing these different correlations, we're observing these patterns and attempting to draw a conclusion about what drives them, but we're not looking directly at the mechanism itself. And astrology is very similar. But yes, one perspective on astrology is that these stars themselves, these different entities, whatever. I mean, we also have to get into a whole conversation about cosmology. We're going to just push that to the side. But yes, one perspective is that these different things, without saying what they are, have particular qualities that get transmitted through the moon to Earth. That's one perspective. But we also have talked about, you know, the
Through the moon, like, so, like, the moon is like the matrix, like the mother, right? So
that is
the idea is that they're born out of the moon.
I would describe it more as the moon is our satellite that it's our closest body that transmits to us the rest of the energy of the cosmos. It sort of filters through it. And so you see in some traditions, people talk about the moon being the body. You know, the body is this vessel that we receive external stimuli through, and that shapes our experience as a spiritual being. But there this gets so messy because some people view it as a very literal mechanical thing. It's close to us. It transmits energy because it's close to us and it's able to receive those and like siphon it down in a way to earth. That's a very physical idea, which would be different than, oh, the moon is the mother. And maybe these are all saying the same thing, but kind of approaching it with different flavors and different perspectives. And then an alternative mechanism would be more of the synchronistic idea we've been talking about, where there's just kind of these, talking about the chronotopes, right? There's these castles, these temporal castles by which things cluster around. And as we're exploring synchromysticism more and more and more as humans, it's very intriguing to me. Is astrology special? Or is it just a language that these chronotopes are expressing themselves through?
I don't know. I
But
mean,
this
I
is not a
that's
simple conversation.
I mean, given how we've looked at the cults of the Great Mother so much and how they keep popping up, I'm a little bit more inclined to this to take seriously this idea of like energy coming through the moon. I If I had heard that like a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago, I'd be like, that's pretty woo. I don't know about that." But mm,
Sure.
I think there might be a little bit more to that now.
Well, there's many theories about the moon being sort of the matrix keeper and the sun being more of our direct access to divine energy. But these are very lengthy
Yeah,
subjects. I'm
yeah.
not probably gonna be able to do all of the
I'm putting
varying
you on the
vantage
spot.
points
Yeah.
justice, but I really do think it's valuable to understand astrology is not a monolith, it's not one tradition. It's emerged through different cultures and mingled with the philosophies and religious outlooks of those different cultures.
That's great. I love it.
Even the Hellenistic revival that we're seeing right now, right? We're taking something that's older, but it's commingled with today's sensibilities. I don't want to get into the weeds
No,
about
you're great.
whether
You're great.
astrological lineages are totally seamless and linear and emerged in different parts of the world. I'm not an expert on that, but it's clear that these things are not static and people have different perspectives. There's an emerging group too of people who think that it's something you can prove statistically, right? Vibrational astrologers who think that these things echo throughout reality vibrationally. And that's what astrology is talking about, like these events echo kind of in the way that we didn't talk about echoing in this chronotope castles concept, but that may or may not be something you could add on to it.
Yeah.
And that might explain the fractal nature of everything. I think to me, the bigger question is what is the seed point? And do we arrive at a specific tipping point where these things go from just a one off to cascading into these fractals? Or is nothing in existence not already a part of a fractal, at least within the time bound reality we are in? I don't know. I don't have
That's
answers to these
uh,
questions.
that's great. I think we need to bracket it there to finish the last slide so we can um meet our time horizon
Yeah.
here. And I know I've been trying to get this to OSIC for 2 weeks now. So I'll just sketch it very quickly. I don't necessarily need to look at my notes here, but um, okay. So I wanted, because Joyce comes up in a variety of different ways in this type of research. I mean, I think we really started to get into it with Marilyn Monroe reading Ulysses and trying to understand what the solar and lunar imagery might be in that and the psychological archetypes that are involved. um, I started looking for connections between JFK and Joyce. And one of the first ones I found, he had a personal connection to Joyce. His one, I believe his back doctor, one of his most trusted doctors, was named Hans Kraus. And Hans Kraus was took English classes from James Joyce. And I guess they would frequently talk about this, or he would ask him about what James Joyce was like. So he was like 1 degree separated from James Joyce via his personal doctor, which is like incredibly fascinating, right? And that led to other inquiries. I got into this. I found this talk. I was unable to attend it, but I found the paper. It's by Barry Keene. He actually, yeah, and it's entitled "An Unwanted Date with Destiny: James Joyce's Ulysses and the Assassination of JFK." And apparently, what he does in this paper is that he traces that there is essentially the cycle, the cavalcade, the motorcade of JFK matches the procession that goes on within Ulysses to kind of an uncanny degree, and that's what this paper is displaying for us. That it's all sort of contained within it already, which goes to this idea that either with Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, there's this idea that persists that like all of history could be recreated if this is the only text that you had. And digging into this a little bit, like why do people say this? And one of the reasons for why people say this is that apparently Joyce was really influenced by this person named Giambattista Vico. I think I may have even had you read something for this, Jordan. I'm probably stealing your thunder. I probably had a caption for you to read, didn't I? I'm sorry.
Oh, no
Um,
worries.
yeah, we and Giambattista Vico supposedly had this cyclical theory about the ages of men, right? And it's ultimately connected with something with like these thunderclaps that get the cycles going, right? And that it initiates what is the rule of gods, which then gives way to the rule of heroes, then to the rule of men, and ultimately a mythological reset where we're born back into the patterns of mythology. Um, and you could potentially say that JFK was part of that rule of heroes. Then we transitioned to the rule of men with like the civil rights legislation. And wherever we are right now, it seems to be very mythopoetic wherever we are right now. And this is intriguing to me. Not that I wield this in any sort of great capacity. Why this is so intriguing to me is that this project really started off trying to do like an archetypal analysis of the Apollo moon missions. And clearly, it has expanded all the way back to the Trinity test and really up to the Artemis missions, although I've not touched on 9/11 really at all. There's large swaths of history in that period that I've not talked about, like, haven't really talked about the Great Society or anything like that right now. But I wonder if it would be possible to make Vico's cyclical history in some way compatible with Young. There is this text that came out. I don't even know if I can read it here, called, is that say Rhetorical Investigations? I think it's written by someone named Leslie. Can you read that? Who wrote that? This might be an interesting resource.
Oh,
I can't.
Vigo and Young.
Yeah. Do you see
Oh,
who
the
wrote?
bottom,
Yeah, I can't make it out.
Leslie Gardner.
Yeah. This might
Yeah.
be. So I don't know how to do it. I mean, maybe it's a situation where like everybody is like coming up with their own terminology. Like I'm developing my terminology from this theory. And we're really all just saying the same thing. Like Vico's got his theory, Young's got his own theory. But we're like really just, we need to find some sort of harmony with the terminology. I don't know. But Vico does seem to be one source of this. And, Marshall McLuhan, who's infamous on sort of commenting on these public spectacles and connecting them back to Vico and to Young, is someone to look into as well. But this quote from Ulysses strikes me differently now. Uh, History, Stephen said, is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake. I think this might, in some ways, point to the idea that we are trapped in these cycles of time that are going to completely continue to reemerge and express themselves despite what we try to do. I do find it interesting that he chose the character's name as Stephen Dedalus for a lot of reasons, because we've looked at the archetypal imagery surrounding JFK and JFK Jr. as being kind of Daedalus and Icarian figures, right? But Daedalus, in a way, is dead all us. And I wonder if this contributes to the idea that, you know, uh, we've played with this idea that we are kind of, in some sense, dead within some sort of simulated reality to begin with. So that is what I had prepared for today. I want to let you two close it out. We've got Jordan. How much time do we have to chat about this?
A few minutes.
A few minutes. I'm
Yeah.
done. You two talk.
Yeah. I really enjoyed today. I thought it was really fun. And I'm enjoying our discussions as they get more into theory and talking about the scaffolding of reality. We've spiraled on and on and on about all the examples and patterns, and they still come up and they still emerge and they're still really exciting. But I think what's more exciting to me is to get up a level, if you will, and talk about how these things might interact.
Working on it. Ostic, last words?
I had a question, just
Yes,
a
go for it.
little. So when I read this thing, history, Stephen Dedalus said, is a nightmare from which we are trying to awake. Like, what do you feel when you read this? What, what, like, what sort of direction does it send you? Does it like, because when I read it for the first time, when I saw this slide, I thought, okay, so I have to abandon history. I have to create something new, regardless of what the history is, and like I have to escape it, or like the history is like some sort of fatalism that is like coming at me like a train to uh, engulf me a whole and make me a part of it in some way. So it's like, what do you feel when you read this? Because usually when we read things day to day in our lives, like I read a newspaper, I read things to entertain, or maybe I look for job postings here and there. So it's like, what's the new thing that's coming? Okay, some new thing is coming, some anxiety is there. There are different directions you can go to while when you read something. Like, is it useful to me? Is it not? Should I ignore it? Does it bring pleasure to me? Does it annoy me? Like, how do you feel when you read this sentence? Just
I
because I want
me
to
per-
know.
me personally,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get beyond the appearances to the structure of the reality that is causing their manifestation. So, in a way, it's an invocation to get out of the cave.
Okay.
But that's out of the
Mhm.
context of the novel, which might mean something totally different. But that's how I interpret it. And we're dead in the cave. We're we're batteries in the matrix.
Yeah. I mean, that's good you pointed out that it's a matrix. I almost forgot that matrix would like connect to mother.
Yeah.
When I started remembering that movie called Oblivion, I think I talked to you about it.
Mm,
It's a good movie. I think that it does the same thing. The Tom Cruise and that other lady, they are like Matrix. They're like the children of Matrix. Then
yeah.
they're creating Adam and Eve everywhere, all around the planet. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to bring it to a close so Jordan can attend her next event. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Ostic. And I look forward to hearing from anyone who stayed this long. And I would love to know your perspective. So, whether that's reaching out to someone individually or commenting on YouTube, emailing Luke, or commenting on Instagram, it's really been magical to connect with you all and find friends who are also insatiably curious. And very grateful to you, Ostic. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, that's my job.
That's your job.
I don't pay you. I don't pay you very well.
You need to ask for a raise.
Yeah. All
Uh,
right.
We'll form a union, Ostic. We'll negotiate
yeah,
together. Watch out,
yeah,
Luke.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.